Ukraine has hammered Russian oil tankers, platforms and refineries as both sides wage a bitter energy war, and Moscow draws strength from its legendary friend, General Winter. Kharkiv again. My name is Jerome Starkey. I'm the defence editor at The Sun newspaper, and this is Frontline, your weekly roundup of the most important news from the war in Ukraine. There have been three distinct dimensions to Ukraine's strikes against Russia's oil infrastructure over the last week. They have hit oil tankers, shadow fleet tankers in the Black Sea. They've hit Lukoil oil refineries in the Caspian Sea, and they've continued their strikes against refineries with a hit in Ryazan. That's about 300 miles inside Russian territory, about 100 miles southeast of Moscow. Those strikes on the tankers in the Black Sea were around Novorossiysk, around the Yuzhnaya Ozereyevka oil terminal. This is a terminal that predominantly pipes oil from Kazakhstan. It's been hit before. Now Ukraine continuing its strikes on the vessels that ship Russia's oil around the world. Part of that campaign we've seen before, not just to cripple production, but to cripple the sales. This is about hurting the Kremlin's coffers, hitting its war chest. That appears to be where Putin feels the pain most. And we've seen those strong reactions from Russia when other aspects of Russian money have been threatened. There were reports that 4 tankers were hit. Those were the Delta Harmony, the Matilda, the Delta Supreme and the Freud. Those ships' owners at Reuters also confirming that only 2 vessels confirmed hit, the other 2 not. So the 2 that we think were hit, the Delta Harmony, and there was dramatic footage of that, and the Matilda. Another long-range strike by Ukraine this week was a drone factory in Taganrog. So that's closer, certainly closer than Ryazan, a little bit closer than Novorossiysk. Taganrog on the sort of southeastern edge of the Sea of Azov. Footage of explosions hitting that drone factory. Again, this not trying to degrade the oil, trying to degrade Russia's weaponry, and that fits a pattern that we've also seen of trying to hit ammunition stores and parts factories and chemical plants in the past. Other interesting things we've seen this week, just interesting footage, claims that a Ukrainian ground drone, that's basically a little robot with a gun on top, held off Russian troops for 45 days, and footage of Russian drones flying down low over the Dnipro River, some of them mounted, or some of them fitted, I should say, with rear-facing cameras, but being taken out by Ukraine's interceptor drones. 2 things that are interesting about that. One is the presence of those rear-facing cameras. Looks like a sort of evolution in the drone warfare to try and defend, so that these drones can try and defend themselves from the interceptors, and indeed the success of these interceptors operating at low levels against the Shahed drones, the weapon of Russia's choice. Russia, of course, continues to hit back. There have been more than 900 missiles and drones fired in the other direction at Ukraine this week. That's not a particularly high number, but they have had a particularly devastating impact this week, and that's largely because at least some of them have hit a major thermal power plant that supplied heating to the capital Kyiv. So large numbers of homes in the capital Kyiv have been without power, and crucially without heating. Temperatures are routinely plunging to minus 20 degrees Celsius this week at night. Even in the day at 3 p.m. In the afternoon, they can hit minus 11. It is incredibly cold. Russia is waging war against Ukrainian civilians, and Ukraine's SBU has called out these strikes as a war crime. It is almost inevitable that the frail and the vulnerable civilians will die as a result of these strikes on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. In the closer battle, both sides have some things to celebrate, but Ukraine has lost more ground than it has gained. Kyiv's forces have managed to push Russia back in and around Kupyansk in the northeast, in Kharkiv province, but they have lost territory in the south and southeast, around Huliapole and Konstantinivka in eastern Donbass. Those areas in the southeast continue to be areas where Russia has maintained ferocious pressure. And I'd heard anecdotally that the Russian commanders in the southeast, one of the Russian commanders around Huliapole, was seen as one of the most aggressive that Ukraine was facing. That commander, who I don't have his name, but one of the ones that Ukraine had sort of clocked for his aggressive and indeed, it would seem at the moment, successful tactics. Finally, let's have a quick roundup of what's happening in the politics. US President Donald Trump, disappointingly, but I'm afraid not surprisingly, has blamed Ukraine's President Zelensky for the lack of peace. This is once again the White House parroting what seems to be the Kremlin lines. France's President Emmanuel Macron, however, has said that his country is stepping in to fill the gap left by America over intelligence, providing Ukraine with battlefield intelligence. He suggests that Paris is now providing 60% of the battlefield intelligence that Ukraine needs to continue its defense. Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer has written an op-ed in a Ukrainian newspaper today where he's called Putin a liar. It won't surprise any of you watching this that Vladimir Putin is a liar. It is unusual for politicians to use that label against each other. His exact words were, when he makes up stories about an attack on his residence, we call those lies for what they are. Now, this is important. It goes back to what we were talking about last week. Russia's oreshnik missile strike on Lviv. Moscow claimed that use of an intermediate range ballistic missile that goes to the edge of space and hurtles down at 13,000 kilometers per hour. Russia claimed that was a retaliation for a Ukrainian attempted attack on one of Vladimir Putin's residences. Donald Trump, often a friend of the Kremlin, sympathetic to their narratives, he disputed that version of events. Keir Starmer has called it out as a lie as well. And the final thing in politics of Ukraine's allies, Britain's Defence Secretary John Healey has said that the UK will collaborate with Ukraine to produce a new ballistic missile. That is a missile that he says will have a range of over 500 kilometers. It will be able to carry a payload of around 200 kilograms, and it will cost no more than £800,000 AP. So this is a serious weapon to try and give Ukraine deep strike capability, a sovereign deep strike capability to attack targets inside Russia. Other thing before we get to questions, worth noting that Ukraine has appointed a new defense minister, and he has talked about the 200,000 people who are AWOL from the armed forces, talking about the manpower crisis that Ukraine knows it is facing and is struggling to redress. As ever, thank you very much for your questions. If you have them, please do ask them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer as many as I can next time. A lot of you taking issue with my suggestion that Russia was on the back foot and that was why they'd fired the oreshnik missile. I can understand why that seems surprising. The reason I said that is both sides through the course of this war have tended to escalate, to break a stalemate or try and break out of a situation where they felt particularly threatened. It's like the cornered rat analogy. The first time Moscow used the oreshnik missile, when it was still experimental, it was to deter, specifically, and they said this, to deter Ukraine's allies from allowing Kyiv to fire Storm Shadow missiles at targets inside Russia. Fundamentally, that didn't work. What we saw last week was the oreshnik fired just after Britain and France and allies had made the Paris Declaration, where they committed their willingness to send forces to Ukraine. There wasn't a huge number of forces. It's likely to be in the low thousands, but nonetheless, that is a red line that Moscow has consistently said it will not accept. But they're nervous about it because it shows Ukraine's allies' commitment to supporting and enforcing a potential peace. And this exposes Russia's lies. It exposes Russia's unwillingness to engage in those meaningful peace talks. On a sort of similar theme, one of you asked, how long can Europe continue to fight? It's a very good question because Europe is supporting Ukraine. America continues to support Ukraine, but that support is significantly less certain under President Donald Trump. We've heard from government ministers in Poland and Germany that at the moment, based on their commitments to Ukraine, financial commitments to Ukraine, Ukraine can continue to fight with European support for the next couple of years. During that period, European NATO members are almost all ramping up their military spending. Certainly in the UK, aims to hit increased spending by 2030, and we're seeing similar trends in the big defence economies, Poland, Germany, and France. All of that, though, obviously hinges on continued American support or continued American willingness to sell its support to Europe and Ukraine. And final question today, could special forces take out Putin to end the war? There's two parts to this question. We've looked at it slightly before. Firstly, could special forces take out Vladimir Putin? It would be incredibly difficult. He is incredibly well protected, just as most world leaders are. Even if special forces could do that, and even if they succeeded, there is no guarantee that it would end the war, because often in situations like that, where somebody is assassinated or a nation feels under attack, what you find is that two things. People rally around the flag, so that might actually increase support for the Russian war in Ukraine. And there's every chance that somebody who is just as extreme and violent and bloody-minded as Vladimir Putin would take his place. Thank you very much for watching. If you've got any questions, please do ask them in the comments below, and I'll try to answer as many as I can next time.